My name is Simeon Rusnak, and you're listening to Winnipeg's Classic 107, and you've been listening or have been able to officially listen to the station for a decade now. 10 years on the air being celebrated, putting the 1-0 in 107. Joining me to reflect on the significance of hitting the double digits is the man with the vision who made it happen in the first place, Golden West CEO and President Elmer Hildebrand. Welcome back to the station, Elmer.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Good to be here.
Well, it's so great to have you, especially on this celebratory day, 10 years on the air. For those who weren't in the audience for the formal flipping of the switch, this grand event that took place at the Centennial Concert Hall back on December 6th, 2013, can you take us back to that day, one that almost didn't happen due to some rather inclement weather? Is that right?
Certainly it was a stormy, cold day, and so nothing like today. And but thankfully it all worked out. We had a nice launch. We had a lot of dignitaries there, and the station has had really, really loyal listeners ever since.
Very well said. I wasn't in the audience. I came on board a year into the station's tenure, but that story has become somewhat legendary. Just how much snow there was. I know music director Chris Wolf loves telling the story about showing up in his knee-high winter boots. But snow aside, can you speak to the feeling, the excitement at the time of a dedicated classical and jazz music radio station returning to Winnipeg in southern Manitoba?
Well, Simon, it was an idea that sort of took a while to germinate. We had purchased a radio station in Winnipeg, which was called Freak, which had a sort of an offbeat audience, but it wasn't going anywhere. And so that was about the time the CBC decided to drop mostly all of their classical music. And my thought was, at CFAM, our original flagship station, we'd always had classical music on different parts of the day, and but it was always on AM. And my thought was, we had a good FM signal in Winnipeg. We could probably use that for some classical music, and certainly the audience was ready for it. And so it's been very interesting to watch the process, unfold over 10 years, and it's hard to imagine that was 10 years ago.
It's incredible how quickly time flies. And like you say, that loyal audience is just so special. And I started out as a listener. I remember being a university student, and all of a sudden there was this new classical music radio station. And as a music major, I can't tell you just how excited I was at the time. And it's just been so special being a part of this ride for the last 9 years personally. You mentioned that sort of vibrant arts community in Winnipeg and southern Manitoba, and that sort of idea that there might be a niche here, there might be a listenership who is keen. Why was it so important to you personally to make this happen?
Well, certainly I knew there was an audience, because we'd had an audience since 1957, and the CBC had an audience for classical music for many, many years. So, I knew that the audience was there. The one thing that I also knew is that there is in Manitoba a real groundswell of music, be it instrumental or choral. And one of the things that I really want to underline is that choral music is something that Manitoba does better than most. And southern Manitoba has long been known for great choral music, as has Winnipeg. And so the entire cultural community in Manitoba and Winnipeg, sort of was ready for this. And so what most of us don't realize is how loyal and how many people there are actually listening all the time. And, it's hard to imagine. They take it for granted now. Which is okay.
But that just speaks to I think how much Classic 107 has become a part of listeners' lives, right? They in a way keep that dial tuned, and they're listening together with us here at the station.
Right, they're there all the time, and there's nothing else like it across Canada. Toronto has a classical music station, but other than that, there isn't a classical music station in Canada, and so. Toronto and Winnipeg are two cities that have it, and so and we get requests from other cities. Well, why don't you do it here? Why don't you do it in Calgary? Why don't you do it wherever? But my sense is that the loyalty and the groundswell of audience probably doesn't exist in many communities like it does in Winnipeg and Manitoba.
And yet the audience is also finding us through the magic of streaming now too. That keeps us connected. We get emails from across the country, south of the border. Just the other week, we had an email from a listener in Austria, in Europe. I mean, like, I think it speaks to just how much classical music and jazz after 9, or I guess depending on your time zone,
around the world. I mean, the streaming allows us to connect with listeners around the world. And we're happy to do that. We're happy to have that kind of a following. And the other thing that happens with all of our Southern Manitoba radio stations is if people move away from this area, they very quickly figure out how they can still listen. Have a listener in Calgary who moved there, and all she says is to her Alexis or smart speaker, get me 107, and it's there.
It's very, very true indeed. It is so special. And like you say, I mean, what we do wouldn't be possible without the loyalty of listeners, the advertisers and the partners who have been with us from the get-go and those who have more recently come on board.
Right.
It is a very, very special time indeed. 10 years. And one thing that tends to happen on birthdays is we get nostalgic for the time that was, the snowstorm that blew through 10 years ago. Right. But we also feel that sort of excitement for the future. And that sort of has me wondering, and I'm sure many thinking, where do you envision the future of Classic 107 going?
Well, I mean, I think the station can continue to serve the audience in Winnipeg and Southern Manitoba for many, many years to come. I don't think we need to change a lot. We need to refine and, always try to do it better. But by and large, we need to continue to serve that audience that keeps following us. And so that's basically my goal, to continue to do that.
Oh, well, we're so appreciative of that goal, and we'll, of course, do our darndest to make it happen. Celebrating 10 years on the airwaves today, Classic 107. Elmer, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Simon. All the best.
Golden West CEO and President, Mr. Elmer Hildebrand in the Classic 107 studio.